So a phrase that I've found popping up a lot recently when it comes to the media I consume is style over substance, which I take to mean that the creator either deliberately or unintentionally emphasizes how a narrative work feels, sounds, looks, and is composed over having a cohesive or focused story or characters. And I see this a lot with animation and video games, especially stuff from Japan. And recently I've come to think of this phrase as less of a criticism and more of a description of a deliberate choice an artist makes to focus on style rather than narrative structure, where the visuals and music can be so good that they transcend being there to support the story and become the main focus of the work. In a way, I think you could liken it to the Impressionist art movement, where the emphasis was not on having a realistic or clear description of something like in realism or romanticism, but to give off the essence or feeling of the subject instead. And I think that there isn't anything especially wrong with this approach, since it seems that creators have had enough restraint for the most part to at least make the intention of the style clear enough, that it's not so abstract it becomes annoying and pretentious. Unfortunately, I think that with Laika Studios' latest film, Missing Link, style over substance was likely more of a result of outside limitations than an active choice, because the film definitely wants to tell a cohesive and straightforward narrative, but it felt like only Laika's visuals really came through to the fullest, and as gorgeous as they are, it's not enough to carry the whole movie for me to call it a masterpiece. So for people who don't know, Laika is a relatively small animation studio that's become famous for its revival of stop-motion animation. Missing Link is their fifth independent release after Coraline, Paranorman, Box Trolls, and Kubo and the Two Strings. And they're a studio that I'm hesitant to criticize because it's clear that they put way more thought and effort into their movies than in a lot of Disney, DreamWorks, and especially Illumination studios. And I didn't need convincing to see Missing Link because Kubo and the Two Strings has become one of my favorite animated movies. So before I get into my criticisms of the story and the message of the movie, I want to again emphasize just how good this movie looks and how well it utilizes the medium of stop-motion animation. Something Laika does really well over older stop-motion movies is making the animation look incredibly fluid. There are parts in both Missing Link and in Kubo where I forgot that all the characters were being moved by hand frame by frame. And even more praise has to go with how well Laika executes action scenes and manages to make them, again, look really fluid. There are two big action scenes in the movie, one in a Wild West saloon, and the other is on a boat, and both were probably my favorite parts of the movie, and you can tell this is where Laika shines, especially. Characters moving around never look like they're clay models morphing from one place to another. Lastly, I think Laika gets facial animation down really well. In a lot of older stop motion, like from the Rankin Bass Christmas movies to even Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach, characters would frequently enter the uncanny valley, and getting any emotional connection with them was really hard. Laika, though, manages, because of the sheer attention to detail, not to terrify its audience. When Mr. Link, the titular character, smiles or frowns, it's actually endearing. And while having characters look a bit creepy and weird may work when your film is partly horror-based, it's nice that Laika managed to not have their latest two films feel like another homage to Nightmare Before Christmas. So if you want to see what's going to be the best-looking animated film of the year, you're going to love this movie. Again, the animation, set design, and colors are absolutely gorgeous. Unfortunately, I think the amount of effort that went into the animation at least partially explains my biggest criticism of the film. It's way too short. While the first third of the movie is pretty well paced, it feels like a good 20 to 30 minutes was cut from the middle and the final act dragged on. And I'm really reluctant to criticize the filmmakers for this because I don't think its short length was Laika's choice. Kubo also felt a bit too short. I think it's due to what Laika exactly is as a studio. Number one, Laika puts so much care and craft into the animation that it feels like the German Panther tank. A tank that was so over-designed and such high quality it was too expensive to be made in large enough quantities. Number two is, Laika isn't Disney or DreamWorks. They don't have the same amount of resources that they do to animate all the scenes that they want. And number three, Laika isn't Disney or DreamWorks, and it sure isn't Illumination, that they don't try and go for the lowest common denominator movies like those god-awful Minions films. And one of the negative results of this is that while critics and audiences generally really like these movies, they just don't get enough back to justify their higher budgets. Kubo only barely made back its $60 million budget. So with all that, let's get to the story itself. Now, I like to go into movies knowing as little as possible, and especially with movies like this, I find it's kind of fun to think of the dumbest, most generic, and most tired plot that they could use, because after Kubo and the Two Strings, I trust that Laika is a lot smarter than that, and of course I was pleasantly surprised. If Illumination Studios made this movie, or if it had been made at any point in the 1990s, I would assume that a kid's movie about a Sasquatch would be about a young kid protagonist finding a wild Sasquatch in the woods and befriending them until an evil corporation wants to tear down the forest. Thankfully, none of this happens in the movie. The basic plot of Missing Link is that Sir Lionel Frost, played by Hugh Jackman, is an adventurer in Victorian Britain who wants to prove himself to a local adventurers club by providing evidence of legendary monsters. The movie starts out with him finding the Loch Ness Monster, but his camera breaks. He finds a note in his study that says he can find the mythical Sasquatch in Washington state. A pleasant surprise I found was that he actually has no problem in finding the Sasquatch, played by Zach Galifianakis. In fact, it was the Sasquatch himself, who becomes known as Mr. Link, who wrote the note in the first place. Turns out he wants to be found so he can be taken to be with his own kind, and that he is related to the Yetis of the Himalayas. So, Frost agrees to take him there in exchange for evidence of his existence. Now, I really love this because it completely avoids the trope that I thought was going to happen, that Lionel Frost was being duplicitous and intended to take Mr. Link back to London to put him on display. But no, Frost makes a fair deal and is completely honest about it. Meanwhile, the leader of the Adventurers Club, Lord Piggott Dunsey, played by Stephen Fry, sends out an assassin to kill Frost and Mr. Link, which results in the aforementioned Wild West Saloon fight scene. So far, so good. This is a really good first act. Likeable characters are set up to go on an adventure, they have clear motivations, they play off each other well, and we have villains to hate and add tension for the heroes. The problem is that after this point, the plot becomes needlessly incohesive. Frost needs a map to the Himalayas, drawn by his late friend and husband of his former lover, Adelina. So, in a still entertaining scene, they sneak into her house in Santa Ana, California, and steal the map only to have her join them on their journey. The main problem with her character is that she acts like a huge third wheel. I loved the early scenes of Mr. Link and Frost interacting because it felt a lot more natural and it was really cool to see their character growth, and Adelina seems like she's only there to remind Frost to be nice to Mr. Link. At multiple points in the movie, her only purpose is to force Frost into having an emotional moment with Mr. Link, and it all just feels so unnecessary. The two's relationship was growing just fine, and it never felt like, as Adelina says, that Frost was ever exploiting Mr. Link. And the deal that they struck seemed perfectly reasonable. It was something that Mr. Link totally and wholeheartedly agreed to. And it may also be due to Hugh Jackman's incredible performance. He is just acting circles around the other characters, and it never felt like he was ever in the wrong. I think Adelina could have far better served the story as being a villain. She would have had a clear motivation as being his former lover and having him steal the map from her. And her voice actress, Zoe Saldana, felt like she could have really played a maniacal villain. Anyways, the movie ends with the characters finding the tribe of Yetis, but they reject Mr. Link for not really being one of their kind. There's a confrontation with Dunsey, Adelina goes off on her own adventure, and Mr. Link and Frost partner together to seek out adventure. All in all, it's a predictable but fitting and fine end for this kind of story. The problem I had, though, was in the film's message. The main moral I think the movie was trying to convey was that greatness isn't determined by what other people think of you, that you don't need to seek the approval of others to have self-worth, especially the people who don't even like you. And that's a fine message, but the movie never really seems to keep that as the focus. Rather than having Frost have his mind clouded by wanting to be in the Adventurers Club throughout the movie at the expense of Mr. Link, it's only brought up at the end of the movie and at the beginning, and all the other emotional scenes seem to just be Adelina telling Frost that he needs to care about his friends, even though his friends are his sassy, annoying ex and a giant ape who only takes things literally. So, with all that said, would I still recommend this movie? Yes, very much so. As I said in the beginning, despite the movie's lack of cohesion when it comes to the story and message, the visuals and style work so much to elevate it, and I could recommend it for that alone. Also, when compared to the deluge of animated films that are coming out this year, at least like a thought-out plot enough for a genuine critique. And lastly, I feel conflicted because I really want Laika to make money from this because I know they make really good films and that their limited budget is probably one of their greatest constraints to making masterpieces. But I don't want to just recommend people see a movie to support its creator. But still, as its own work, despite its narrative and pacing issues, Missing Link was nothing other than a delight to watch. Thank you very much.